What would it feel like to give everything in your life to work harder, to rise higher, only to have a stranger decide, in a single moment, that you don't belong? Imagine settling into your seat, carrying both the weight of your past and the quiet pride of your success. And then, without warning, the very person meant to serve you delivers a slap across your face. In that instant, the world stops. Do you stay silent, swallow the pain, and hope no one notices? Or do you rise, risking judgment, to prove that your dignity is not negotiable? Now, here is the twist that changed everything. That woman wasn't just another passenger. She was the billionaire who owned the very plane she was humiliated on. And in that truth lies a story that would shake an entire industry. If it were you, how would you respond? With anger, with silence, or with the courage to turn injustice into change? This isn't just about one slap. It's about what we all deserve when we step into the skies. Respect. Stay with me, because what comes next will leave you questioning your own choices. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss stories that matter. The hum of the jet engines was steady, almost soothing, as the first-class cabin filled with the quiet clinks of champagne flutes and hushed conversations. Passengers leaned back into wide leather seats, scrolling through phones or opening neatly folded newspapers. It was the picture of order and luxury until the sound of an open palm striking skin cracked through the air like a gunshot. Heads turned in unison. For a moment, silence swallowed the cabin. Camille Harrington sat motionless, her head tilted slightly from the force of the slap. Her cheeks stung, a sharp warmth radiating across her skin. But her dark eyes stayed calm, fixed on the woman standing over her. The woman in the pressed uniform was Clara Miles, lead flight attendant on this flight from Miami to New York. Clara's manicured hand still hovered midair, trembling faintly, as if even she couldn't quite believe what she'd done. Her red lips parted, then pressed shut again, a flash of fear in her eyes quickly buried under practiced authority. "You need to move," Clara said sharply, her voice louder than necessary. "This seat isn't for people like you." Gas rippled through the rows. A man across the aisle dropped his newspaper to his lap. A younger woman raised her phone instinctively, then hesitated, torn between filming and freezing in shock. In the corner, Angela Cruz, a junior flight attendant, pressed a hand to her mouth. She had seen Clara's cruelty in smaller doses before cutting remarks. Subtle humiliations, but never this. Camille did not rise. She did not argue. Slowly, with the composure of someone who had spent a lifetime practicing restraint, she reached for a cloth napkin and dabbed the corner of her lip. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though she were giving Clara one last chance to recognize the enormity of what had just happened. No apology came. Instead, Clara straightened, as if doubling down on her authority. "I asked you politely. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The words stung more than the slap. They weren't just commands. They were a verdict. They carried the weight of assumption that Camille did not belong here, that she was trespassing in a world that Clara believed was reserved for others. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Camille let it linger. She studied the faces around her, the elderly man 2 seats ahead, his jaw clenched in outrage, the socialite across the aisle, who smirked as if pleased by the spectacle, Angela in the galley, pale and uncertain. Every pair of eyes was a mirror, reflecting not just this moment, but every injustice they had witnessed or endured in silence. When Camille finally spoke, her voice was soft, so controlled that those nearest had to lean in to hear. "You've just made a mistake," she said. Clara blinked, thrown off balance. "Excuse me." Camille folded the napkin neatly, placing it on the tray table as if she had all the time in the world. Then she looked up, her gaze steady, unflinching. "You should know," she continued, "that I own this plane and the airline that flies it." The cabin seemed to exhale all at once, gasps, murmurs, the scrape of a glass being set down too quickly. Clara's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but no words came. Angela Cruz took a step forward, as though to shield Camille, though she knew Camille needed no protecting. The young attendant's voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh, my God." Across the aisle, the older man who had dropped his newspaper spoke, his voice rough but steady. "Lady, you just assaulted your boss." Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering urgently now, some pulling out phones to record. The socialite's smirk faded into nervous silence. Clara's hands fumbled against the edge of the seat back. She looked smaller now, the uniform no longer a shield, but a costume that failed to hide her fear. "I didn't know," she stammered, as if ignorance could erase what she had done. Camille stood, smooth and unhurried, her presence commanding without effort. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This flight will be grounded," she said simply. She reached for her phone, dialed a single number, and spoke 6 words. "Secure the runway. Have security waiting." The entire cabin went still. Clara's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but none came. Even Evelyn, the socialite who had seemed to enjoy the humiliation moments before, now avoided her gaze, unwilling to be aligned with the wrong side of history. Angela Cruz found her voice. "Ms. Harrington," she began, but emotion caught in her throat. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Camille turned to her with the faintest nod, a silent reassurance that she had seen, that she understood. The jet engines continued their steady hum, indifferent to the storm inside the cabin. Outside, the clouds stretched endless and white, a serene canvas that mocked the chaos below. Inside, one truth hung heavy. A single slap had broken the illusion of order, exposing not just one woman's prejudice, but an entire system built on quiet assumptions of who belonged and who did not. Camille remained standing, her presence steady as stone, as the passengers around her began to realize they were no longer just witnesses to an ugly incident. They were standing at the edge of a story that would stretch far beyond the walls of this cabin, one that would shake an entire industry, and somewhere deep inside, even as her cheek still burned. Camille knew this, the revolution in the skies had just begun. Camille Harrington had been slapped before, not in an airplane cabin, not in front of an audience of strangers with phones raised, but long ago, when the world had tried to remind her that she was small, that she was supposed to know her place. Those moments had shaped her, forged her quiet resilience. It was why, now, even as her cheek still burned from Clara Miles's hand, her eyes remained calm. To understand Camille in that instant, you had to step back into her past, into a narrow apartment in Atlanta where the air conditioner rattled like it was always on the verge of breaking. She grew up the only child of Denise Harrington, a woman who worked double shifts at a hospital cafeteria and came home with swollen ankles, but always managed to put dinner on the table. Camille remembered watching her mother count tips, folding each dollar carefully as if the paper itself could be stretched into more. "Money isn't just money," Denise had told her once, dropping coins into a jar marked college. "It's choices. It's the difference between being trapped and being free." Camille carried those words like scripture. She worked through high school with the relentlessness of someone who knew there was no safety net beneath her. Straight A's, scholarships, part-time jobs at diners and libraries. While her peers talked about spring breaks and prom dresses, she talked about grant applications and internships. There was no glamour in it, but there was determination. At 19, she stepped into the world of computer science, finding a rhythm in the logic of code that made sense when life didn't. By 25, she was running her own tech startup from a rented basement office with 3 used laptops and a vision nobody believed in but her. By 30, she had sold that company to a major firm for a figure that made her mother cry. By 35, she had built Harrington Aerospace, the company that now owned the very plane where Clara had just struck her. But success had not softened her memory. It had not dulled the sting of every room she walked into where her authority was questioned before she opened her mouth. Every deal where she had to prove her worth twice over because she was both black and a woman. She carried those scars quietly, polishing them into armor. That was why she had chosen to board this flight incognito. Not as Camille Harrington, CEO and billionaire, but simply as a passenger named Camille Harper, an ordinary traveler who would taste the truth of how her airline treated those without wealth or status to shield them. She had wanted to know if the complaints she had been hearing from other passengers about subtle humiliations, quiet exclusions, were true. She had not expected her test to end with a slap across the face. As she stood there, steady in the cabin, her mind flickered between present and past. She saw Clara's cold eyes, but she also saw a high school teacher who once told her, "Girls like you don't end up in science." She felt the sting of Clara's hand, but she remembered a bank officer sliding back her loan application when she was 22 with the words, "We don't think you're the type who can manage this kind of responsibility." Each wound, each dismissal, had shaped the calm she now carried. She had learned that rage wasted energy, that dignity held steady, cut deeper than shouting ever could. Camille lowered herself back into her seat, crossing her hands neatly in her lap. The hush in the cabin stretched on. Passengers were waiting for her to scream, to demand, to unleash fury, but she would not. Fury was easy to dismiss. Composure was impossible to ignore. Her thoughts drifted to her mother. Denise had passed away 2 years earlier, never getting to step foot inside the first-class cabin her daughter now owned. She would have laughed at the absurdity of her daughter flying under a false name just to test customer service. "Baby, rich folks find new ways to suffer," she would have said, half joking, half wise. But then she would have added, "If it's about fairness, then it matters. Even when it's small, fairness." That was what kept Camille's heartbeat steady now. She wasn't thinking about her own humiliation. She had endured worse. She was thinking about what this moment revealed for everyone else. If Clara felt free to treat her like this while not knowing her identity, what had she done to passengers with no power at all, to those who couldn't make a phone call and ground a flight? She glanced at Angela Cruz. The young attendant's eyes were wide, her lips pressed tight, as though she was holding back years of swallowed words. Camille read her expression instantly. Angela had seen this before. Perhaps not a slap, but the same pattern of judgment, delivered in smaller doses that never made the news. Camille made a quiet vow in that moment. This wouldn't just end with Clara's downfall. It would not be reduced to a viral clip or a corporate apology crafted by PR teams. This had to be the beginning of something larger, a reckoning that would echo through her company and beyond. As the plane cut through clouds, Camille turned her gaze to the window. The view outside was endless sky, blinding white sun spilling across wingtips. It reminded her of afternoons as a child when she would lie on the hood of her mother's old car and watch planes trace lines through the blue. She used to imagine being inside one of those cabins, wondering who got to sit there, what kind of lives they lived. Now she knew, and she knew too, that not everyone was welcomed the same way once they entered. A murmur spread through the cabin. Passengers were talking again, hushed but urgent. Some whispered their support. Others shook their heads, still processing what they had seen. Camille didn't blame them. Witnessing injustice up close was always unsettling. It forced people to confront not only what happened, but their own silence in the face of it. Her phone buzzed in her palm, a discreet vibration from the secure line she had dialed earlier. A simple message appeared. Runway secured. Security awaiting. She closed her eyes briefly, not out of relief but reflection. The decision she had just made would ripple outward. Grounding a flight was no small thing. It meant delays, angry passengers, lost revenue. But she didn't flinch. Some costs were worth paying. Some moments were worth pausing the sky for. Inside her, though, there was a quiet ache. Not from Clara's slap, but from the familiar weight of knowing that power didn't shield her from prejudice. No matter how high she climbed, there would always be someone ready to remind her of the boxes they believed she belonged in. Yet that ache wasn't despair. It was fuel. As she sat in silence, her mind was already assembling questions. How many others had filed complaints? How many times had supervisors turned a blind eye? What kind of culture had allowed Clara Miles to feel so comfortable, drawing lines between who belonged and who didn't? She knew the answers would be ugly. She also knew that this was the moment to dig them out into the light. The engines droned steadily, carrying the plane northward. Camille's face was unreadable, but inside her, the resolve was sharper than steel. She would not let this pass as a single incident. She would not let Clara's slap be remembered as just another viral headline. It would be remembered as the spark that forced an entire system to change. And so she sat, her eyes calm, her breath even, her mind already shaping the storm to come. Clara Miles had always believed the uniform gave her power, not just authority to guide passengers to their seats or ensure safety protocols, but a kind of invisible shield that made her untouchable. The navy blue fabric, the gold pin on her lapel, the polished smile together, they created a mask she could slip behind. From the first day she put it on, she felt taller, sharper, more important. When she looked at herself in the mirror before every flight, she whispered, "You are in control." It was her ritual. She had worked hard to get here, climbing from economy service to first-class lead attendant, memorizing wine lists and grooming standards. But somewhere along the way, ambition had curdled into entitlement. The longer she wore the uniform, the more she believed it gave her the right to decide who was worthy of the space she managed. She didn't admit that to anyone, not even to herself. But it was there in every gesture who got the warm smile and who got the curt nod, whose complaints she smoothed over with champagne and whose she dismissed with a shrug. She noticed details others ignored: the cut of a suit, the shine of a watch, the way someone carried themselves. And she used those details to sort passengers into two categories, deserving and undeserving. Camille Harrington, dressed simply in a dark sweater and slacks, carrying a modest handbag, had triggered Clara's radar the moment she stepped into the cabin. Clara saw her ticket, saw her seat assignment, but what Clara really saw was someone she decided did not fit. In Clara's mind, it wasn't personal, it was order. Order kept the cabin balanced, kept the wealthy satisfied, kept her career intact. Angela Cruz had noticed the shift in Clara's tone the instant Camille walked in. Angela was younger, knew enough that she still felt nervous checking overhead bins. She watched Clara intercept Camille at the boarding door, watched the slight narrowing of her eyes. Angela had learned to read those signals quickly. Clara was about to draw a line, and once she drew it, nothing short of a miracle could erase it. "Seat 2A," Angela had whispered, glancing at Camille's boarding pass. "Yes," Camille replied softly. Clara had stepped between them. "We'll double-check that," she said, voice clipped. "Please wait." Angela remembered the heat of embarrassment that spread across Camille's face, the way she held her ground without protest, without anger. Angela wanted to step in, to say the seat was fine, that everything matched. But Clara shot her a warning glance. It was the kind of look that said, "Stay out of this if you value your job." So Angela stayed quiet, and she hated herself for it. As the flight progressed, Clara's power show continued in small cuts. Camille was overlooked for champagne service, then offered a cheaper meal despite her pre-order. Each time, Camille responded with calmness that unnerved Clara more than any outburst could have. The calm felt like resistance, a refusal to be put in the box Clara had prepared for her. Clara didn't understand it. Most passengers eventually snapped, complained, demanded, raised their voices. That was when Clara would smile sweetly, apologize, and turn the tables, painting herself as the professional dealing with the difficult customer. But Camille wasn't playing the role. She was too quiet, too observant. It made Clara uneasy. And yet, Clara pushed further. The uniform gave her license, or so she believed. By the time her hand connected with Camille's cheek, Clara wasn't thinking about consequences. She was thinking about control. She was thinking about reminding everyone, including Angela, who held authority in this cabin. Now, standing in the aftermath of that slap, Clara felt the first cracks in the shield of her uniform. The cabin had turned on her. Passengers whispered, filmed, stared with open judgment. The calm in Camille's eyes unsettled her even more. What Clara couldn't see in that moment was how much her actions mirrored something larger, the quiet hierarchy that lived in countless uniforms across industries, the invisible decisions made every day about who belonged and who didn't. Angela, meanwhile, wrestled with her own silence. She had joined this airline with wide-eyed dreams of travel and opportunity. She had grown up in San Antonio, raised by grandparents who told her to treat everyone with respect, because you never know their story. She carried those words into her training, into her first nervous flights. But working under Clara had taught her a different lesson. Survival often meant silence. Still, Angela's heart pounded as she replayed the image of Clara's hand against Camille's cheek. Something inside her cracked. She couldn't unsee it. She couldn't excuse it. And when Camille's eyes briefly met hers after making the phone call, Angela felt as if she had been seen too, not just her silence, but her potential to do more for the rest of the flight. Clara paced the aisle like a caged animal, whispering excuses to passengers, trying to restore her authority. But the balance had shifted. The uniform no longer made her taller. It made her smaller, diminished by the weight of her own actions. Angela served drinks in silence, her hands trembling. Passengers nodded their thanks more warmly than usual, perhaps recognizing her as separate from the cruelty they had just witnessed. One man squeezed her wrist lightly and said, "You did nothing wrong." She almost believed him, but not quite. Doing nothing, she realized, was exactly the problem. Camille remained steady in her seat, the napkin still folded on her tray. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look angry. She looked like someone carrying a memory from far away, something private that no one else in the cabin could see. And in that private place, she was already making decisions not just about Clara, but about the culture that had allowed Clara to act with such certainty. The power Clara thought she held in her uniform was unraveling thread by thread. What remained was something raw and human, the kind of exposure she had spent her career avoiding. She had used the uniform as armor, but now it betrayed her, revealing not authority, but arrogance. The engines carried the plane closer to New York, but for Clara, time seemed frozen. Every second stretched. Every whisper felt louder. Every phone pointed in her direction heavier. For the first time, she wasn't in control, and she didn't know how to live without it. The slap had been the climax, but the truth was, it hadn't started there. It had begun in smaller, almost invisible ways, the kind of cuts so slight that they might have gone unnoticed if you weren't the one on the receiving end. That was the thing about discrimination. It often began quietly, woven into gestures so ordinary they almost looked like protocol. Almost. From the moment Camille Harrington boarded, Clara Miles had been setting the stage. The first sign came when Camille handed over her boarding pass at the first-class door. Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. She glanced at the ticket as though it might be counterfeit, then studied Camille with an expression that seemed to ask, "Are you sure you belong here for a moment?" She held on to the pass just a little too long, creating that awkward pause that made nearby passengers turn their heads. Then, with a sharp nod, she finally allowed Camille to step inside. Inside the cabin, the differences continued. Passengers to her left and right were greeted by name, offered champagne almost before they sat down. Camille, though, was bypassed. When she raised her hand to catch Clara's attention, Clara responded with a perfunctory, "I'll be with you in a moment," then never returned. Angela Cruz had seen it all. She was the one who ended up discreetly sliding a glass of water onto Camille's tray, cheeks burning with shame, because she knew it wasn't the same as the champagne flute offered elsewhere. She didn't miss how Camille accepted it with grace, her thank you quiet, her eyes steady. Angela wanted to whisper an apology, but Clara's presence loomed like a shadow. Later came the meal service. First-class menus promised delicacies: grilled salmon with lemon butter, filet mignon with peppercorn sauce, vegan risotto with fresh herbs. Camille had pre-ordered the risotto, something light for the 2-hour flight. Instead, Clara dropped a plastic-wrapped sandwich onto her tray. Turkey and cheese, the kind of meal economy passengers might buy if nothing else was available. Camille raised her eyes, questioning without words. Clara tilted her head, feigning innocence. It must have been a mix-up. "We don't have your choice available anymore. That's all we can offer." The lie was obvious. Camille had overheard Clara confirming menu orders with Evelyn Brooks, the socialite across the aisle, not 10 minutes earlier. Evelyn had been served the risotto Camille was supposed to receive, complete with extra Parmesan flakes Clara grated at her seat for dramatic effect. Evelyn's amused glance across the aisle had confirmed the cruelty was intentional. Angela wanted to protest. She knew there was another risotto in the galley. She had placed it there herself. But the word stuck in her throat, blocked by fear of retaliation. Clara had a way of making anyone who crossed her pay for it. Angela was still new, still proving herself, and the last thing she needed was to be labeled as difficult. Camille. However, simply unwrapped the sandwich. She didn't eat it, but she didn't push it away either. She set it neatly on the tray, untouched, a quiet refusal more cutting than any outburst. By then, the tension in the cabin had become something tangible. David Monroe, the older passenger across the aisle, had folded his newspaper but kept his eyes fixed firmly on the scene. He didn't intervene, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of hesitation, but his clenched jaw spoke volumes. He had worn a uniform once, too, though a very different kind, the olive green of the Army. He recognized power plays when he saw them. Every small slight was adding up, a pattern impossible to dismiss as oversight. And each time, Camille met it not with anger, but with silence so composed it unnerved those around her. Clara, on the other hand, mistook that composure for weakness. The uniform had taught her to read passengers quickly. The angry ones burned out fast. The complainers could be soothed with wine. But the quiet ones, those were easy to push further, easy to corner. She convinced herself that Camille's silence was submission, and that conviction gave her the false confidence to escalate. By the time she told Camille she had to change seats, that perhaps 2A wasn't the right fit for her, the tension had reached a breaking point. The request wasn't phrased as a request at all. It was an order delivered with the kind of smile that carried no warmth. "You'll be more comfortable in the back," Clara said smoothly, her tone suggesting she was doing Camille a favor. That was when Camille finally spoke, her voice even but firm. "No, I'll remain here." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But the firmness in those 4 words drew a line in the sand. Clara felt it and bristled, her authority challenged in a way she wasn't used to. For a flicker of a second, she hesitated. Then her pride surged, and pride, mixed with prejudice, made her reckless. The slap came before she had time to think, before she realized that her hand, not her words, had just crossed the line from cruelty into violence. Angela gasped. David Monroe dropped his paper. Phones lifted into the air. Evelyn Brooks smirked like it was theater, and Camille didn't flinch. Her calm eyes met Clara's, and for the first time, Clara felt the weight of her own uniform turning heavy, no longer a shield, but a burden she couldn't carry. The cabin, once filled with the quiet hum of luxury, now pulsed with an electricity that everyone felt in their bones. A storm had been building from the moment Camille boarded, cut after cut, slight after slight. The slap wasn't an isolated act. It was the inevitable explosion of everything Clara had been sowing since the first forced pause at the boarding door. And in that moment of stillness, just before Camille revealed who she truly was, every passenger realized they were no longer watching ordinary service in first class. They were watching a fault line crack open in real time, one that would shake the ground far beyond this flight. The cabin was silent in the seconds after the slap, as though time itself had stopped to take in the shock. The passengers' disbelief hung thick in the air. Clara Miles, chest heaving, realized what she had done only when she saw every phone lifted in unison, capturing her hand frozen mid-air. Camille Harrington's cheek faintly red, but her eyes as calm as stone. Camille did not rush to defend herself, did not shout or demand. Instead, she lifted her chin with quiet grace and said one sentence that seemed to slice through the entire aircraft. "You've just struck the owner of this plane." The effect was instantaneous. Gas erupted from rows of leather seats. Evelyn Brooks, who had been smirking in satisfaction a moment earlier, dropped her champagne flute, the glass shattering against the carpeted floor. David Monroe leaned forward in his seat, his weathered face breaking into the ghost of a grim smile. He had suspected Camille wasn't just any passenger, but hearing the truth spoken so calmly was still like watching a battlefield turn on a single command. Angela Cruz's knees went weak. She clutched the galley counter for balance, the weight of relief and fear colliding in her chest. Relief that Camille wasn't alone in this. Fear for what would follow for Clara, for the airline, for everyone who had seen the blow. Clara blinked, her voice faltering. That's impossible. You can't. I can. Camille interrupted, her tone steady. And I do. Harrington Aviation owns this fleet. You're wearing my uniform, serving under my name, and you thought I didn't belong in this seat. The murmurs turned into open whispers. She owns the airline, someone muttered. No way. But the disbelief quickly melted under the evidence of Camille's composure, the authority in her voice that could not be faked. Clara's arrogance cracked like porcelain. I didn't know, she stammered. I thought you thought wrong, Camille replied simply. She did not raise her voice, yet the words landed harder than any shout. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, unaware of the storm erupting in first class. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. But inside the cabin, descent had already begun the freefall of Clara Miles's career. Evelyn Brooks tried to regain her composure. She adjusted her silk scarf and leaned toward Camille with an ingratiating smile. Ms. Harrington, had I known, I would have said something sooner. Of course, none of this represents the airline's values. You know how staff can be temperamental. Camille turned her head slowly, her gaze locking on Evelyn. You sat there and laughed while she humiliated me, and now you want to distance yourself. The softness in her tone only sharpened the sting. Evelyn flushed, looking away, realizing there was no saving her complicity. David Monroe spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly but firm. Ms. Harrington, I saw everything. If you need a witness, you've got one. His words carried weight, the kind of credibility that came from a man who had lived through wars both literal and corporate. Camille inclined her head slightly in gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Monroe. I may take you up on that. Angela finally found her courage, stepping forward, though her voice shook. Ms. Harrington, I tried to intervene. Clara, she wouldn't let me. I knew it was wrong. Camille's expression softened as she looked at the young attendant. I saw you. Integrity is noticed, even when fear keeps it quiet. The acknowledgement brought tears to Angela's eyes. She felt seen, truly seen, in a way that Clara had never allowed. Meanwhile, Clara was unraveling. Her hands shook as she tried to gather her authority, but every move seemed hollow. This isn't fair, she muttered under her breath. I didn't know who she was. Camille heard her, and for the first time, her calm cracked just slightly, not into anger, but into quiet sorrow. And that is the problem, isn't it? You thought respect is given only when you know someone has power. You thought dignity belonged only to those who fit your narrow vision of worth. That is why you've lost not just your job, but something far more precious, your credibility as a human being trusted to serve others. Every passenger in the cabin felt the weight of those words. The slap had been shocking, but it was Camille's articulation of the deeper truth that lingered like a wound freshly exposed. When the plane touched down minutes later, the tension had not lifted. The cabin doors opened to a crowd waiting at the gate security personnel, airline executives, and unbeknownst to Clara, a team of lawyers already dispatched by Harrington Aviation headquarters. News of the incident had spread mid-air, Social media was flooded with clips of the slap, hashtags forming within minutes. Seat for all, slap by power, and Pow Sky Equality were already trending by the time the wheels kissed the runway. As passengers disembarked, reporters' voices echoed from the terminal. Is it true? Did a flight attendant really strike the CEO? Cameras flashed as travelers exited with stunned expressions, some already recounting the story to eager microphones. Camille did not rush. She stood, adjusted her blazer, and gathered her things with deliberate calm. When she stepped into the aisle, security personnel instinctively moved to surround her, but she raised a hand. No. Let them see me as I am. I have nothing to hide. Clara, in contrast, was escorted out with her head down, her once crisp uniform wrinkled, her makeup smudged by tears she had fought to conceal. As she passed the reporters, someone shouted, "Do you regret it?" She flinched, but didn't answer. On the tarmac, the night air smelled of jet fuel and rain. Camille paused, her gaze sweeping over the flashing lights of cameras and the tense faces of executives who had gathered to greet her. One of them. Gerald Marks, the COO stepped forward nervously. Ms. Harrington, we are mortified. We will handle this immediately. You will, Camille agreed, her voice firm, but not as a cover-up, not as damage control. This isn't just about me. It's about every passenger who has ever been made to feel less because someone in uniform thought they could play gatekeeper. We will address this publicly, transparently, and permanently. Her words weren't just a statement. They were a declaration of war against a culture she had now exposed under the brightest spotlight imaginable. David Monroe, disembarking behind her, caught her eye once more. You've got more allies than you think, he said quietly, then disappeared into the crowd. Angela, lingering at the doorway, gave Camille a small, almost shy nod. Camille returned it with a reassuring glance that said, your time will come. Use it well. By the time Camille stepped into the waiting car, the world outside the tinted windows was already buzzing with a storm that could no longer be contained. The slap had ignited it. But it was her calm revelation, her unmasking, that had turned it into something more than scandal. It was now a movement. And Clara Miles, sitting in the back of a police cruiser across the tarmac, finally understood what she had unleashed. By morning, the story was no longer confined to the walls of a plane or the tarmac at the airport. It had spilled into every living room, onto every phone screen, into every workplace conversation. The headline flashed across television networks with unrelenting rhythm. Flight attendant slaps black woman unaware. She's the billionaire owner of the plane. Clips of the incident had been replayed millions of times. Each frame of the slap, each second of Camille Harrington's calm revelation, had been dissected, slowed down, quoted. Some networks ran the video in silence, letting the images speak for themselves. Others layered commentary, panel discussions, and outrage over the unfolding scandal. Social media, with its merciless appetite for spectacle, carried the story like wildfire. Yet beneath the sensationalism, something deeper was stirring. Hashtags like Walking Sky Equality and Eat Dignity in Flight weren't just trending, they were expanding into real conversations. Passengers from every background began sharing their own stories of being profiled, dismissed, or humiliated on flights. An African-American man in Atlanta recounted being asked 3 times to prove his first-class ticket was real. A Latina businesswoman wrote about a flight attendant suggesting she must be lost because first class is up front. An elderly veteran spoke of being ignored for service until a younger, wealthier-looking man flagged someone down. The slap had ripped the curtain away, exposing an ugliness people had felt for years, but rarely discussed openly. Inside a suite at the Harrington Aviation Headquarters in Chicago, Camille watched the coverage with her core advisors. Gerald Marks, the COO, looked as though he hadn't slept. His tie was loose, his jaw tight. "The board is demanding immediate statements," he said. "Our stock dipped another 9% this morning. Investors are panicking. They're calling this catastrophic." "Good," Camille said evenly, sipping black coffee. "Let them panic. Catastrophe is the only thing that gets systems to change." Gerald gaped at her, almost dropping his tablet. "Good, Camille. With respect, we are hemorrhaging value. If this continues, we risk hostile takeover bids. Already, Castellano Capital has been circling." "I know Victor Castellano," Camille replied, her tone sharp enough to silence the room. "He feeds on fear. We don't feed him. We focus." Angela Cruz sat at the far end of the table, still in disbelief that she'd been invited to this meeting at all. Just days earlier, she had been a junior flight attendant terrified of speaking up. Now she was in the inner circle, her testimony already forming part of the internal investigation. She hadn't spoken yet, but she watched Camille with something close to awe. Camille continued, her voice steady but alive with conviction. "This isn't about a single flight attendant. Clara Miles is a symptom, not the disease. The disease is systemic, the quiet policies, the unspoken codes, the tolerance of gatekeeping. If we treat this as one bad apple, then we're no better than the ones who allowed it to fester. We go deeper." Gerald rubbed his forehead. "Deeper means lawsuits, settlements, more bad press." "Are you prepared for that?" Camille leaned forward, folding her hands. "I was slapped across the face on my own aircraft because I didn't look the part. I will take lawsuits over silence any day." The room went quiet. Even Gerald had no response. David Monroe, who had agreed to meet with the legal team, entered just then, dressed in a modest suit. He carried the quiet gravitas of someone who had weathered storms most of the room couldn't imagine. "If you want me to testify," he said, "I'll do it. I'll say what I saw, and I'll say why it matters." Camille nodded. "We will need your voice. Mr. Monroe." "Thank you." Angela finally found her words, though they came out trembling. "Ms. Harrington, people online. They're sharing stories. Thousands of them. It's not just about us anymore. This is bigger than the airline." Camille turned toward her, eyes softening. "Exactly. Angela, that's why we do this right. That's why we don't hide. Every person who's ever been told they didn't belong is watching what we do next, and we will not fail them." Later that day, Camille sat for her first primetime interview. The set was minimalist, the anchor careful not to sensationalize. Still, the cameras seemed to pierce into her private self. "Ms. Harrington," the interviewer began, "millions of people have seen the video. Some say you're a symbol, now a voice for those discriminated against in the skies. But you're also a CEO with shareholders to answer to." Which role takes priority? Camille didn't flinch. "They're the same role. A company without integrity doesn't survive. Profit at the cost of human dignity isn't profit, it's theft. If I have to choose between shareholders and passengers, I'll choose the people we serve, and I believe the right shareholders will stand with me when they see the truth." The clip aired that evening and struck a chord. It wasn't fiery rhetoric that caught attention. It was her calm, unshaken conviction. Commentators compared her poise to civil rights leaders of earlier generations, firm without shouting, powerful without spectacle. Meanwhile, Clara Miles was facing her own public reckoning. Booked into the county jail the night of the incident. She had been released on bail, but her face was everywhere, splashed across tabloids, dissected on talk shows. Old colleagues came forward with stories of her behavior passengers mocked, coworkers belittled, complaints buried. Clara's world, once built on image and authority, was crumbling into dust. At home in Alabama, her parents watched the news with heartbreak. Her mother whispered through tears, "That's not the girl we raised." Clara herself sat alone in her small apartment, curtains drawn against the outside world. She scrolled through the endless stream of messages, insults, threats, but also a few strange notes of empathy from other attendants admitting they too had been pressured to enforce brand standards that translated into discrimination. She realized, too late, that she hadn't simply failed as a person. She had been molded by a broken culture and had chosen to play along until it destroyed her. Back at Harrington Aviation, the board convened an emergency session. Some members were furious, insisting Camille's approach was reckless. "You're turning us into a crusade." One said, "We're an airline, not a social movement." Camille's response was ice and fire at once. "We are both. Every plane that leaves the ground carries people, not cargo. If we forget their dignity, we deserve to fall." It was Angela who later described the moment as watching a storm take human form. Camille wasn't shouting, but her words had the power of thunder rolling across the room. By the end of the week, something remarkable had happened. The airline's stock, after its steep fall, began to stabilize, not because the storm was over, but because passengers themselves were rallying. Thousands pledged loyalty to Harrington Aviation, vowing to support the airline that was finally addressing what others had ignored. The grassroots campaign, Fly with Dignity, surged across platforms, turning outrage into action. Camille received messages that moved her more than any market report. A young law student wrote, "Seeing you stand tall gave me courage to call out the bias I face in my internship." A grandmother from Detroit wrote, "I fly to see my grandkids twice a year. I've been humiliated more times than I can count. Thank you for saying what we couldn't." But the most powerful message came one night from an unknown number. It was Clara Miles. The text was brief, halting. "I know sorry isn't enough, but I want to change. I don't know how." Camille stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, "Start by listening, then do the work. If you're sincere, one day you may help others avoid your mistakes." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door cracked open. And perhaps that mattered most. For Camille, the echo of that slap no longer stung her cheek. It resonated through boardrooms, across airwaves, into the hearts of passengers who had long been silent. The wound had become a mirror, and what it reflected was a choice to look away, or to finally confront what had been festering in the skies. The days that followed turned into a battleground of perception. Every major network, every blog, every corner of the internet seemed to have an opinion about Camille Harrington, Clara Miles, and what the incident meant. Talk shows debated whether the slap was a moment of personal prejudice or a symbol of something larger. Editorials asked whether airlines had quietly institutionalized bias through vague customer image policies. The story refused to fade. In the midst of this storm, Camille found herself moving between press conferences, legal briefings, and late-night strategy sessions with her communications team. Yet she carried herself with the same calm that had stunned passengers on that flight. She didn't rant or rail against her attackers. Instead, she leaned on precision. Words matter. She told her team, Each one we use will either close a wound or deepen it. We choose carefully. Angela Cruz watched in awe from the corner of the room. Every time Camille spoke, she seemed to transform the chaos into clarity. But Angela could see the toll it was taking Camille's shoulders tight from sleepless nights. Her eyes shadowed but determined. For all her strength, she was still human, and the weight of expectation pressed heavily. Meanwhile, Clara Miles had become a media obsession of her own. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment. Clips of her in uniform, striding down jet bridges, were dug up from airline archives and replayed with biting commentary. Clara tried to hide, but hiding was impossible. Her name was forever attached to the slap, a single violent second that had defined her life. One evening, Camille was scheduled for a televised town hall moderated by a respected journalist. The audience included passengers, employees, and critics alike. It was a chance to reclaim the narrative, but also a risk live questions meant live consequences. The event began with the journalist asking, "Ms. Harrington, you've been called both a victim of bias and a manipulator using this moment for corporate gain. How do you respond to those who say this is all theater?" Camille let the silence linger, forcing the audience to lean in. Then she answered, her voice steady. "Theater is pretending. What happened to me was real. It wasn't a script. It wasn't staged. And it isn't just about me. It's about the thousands of people sharing their own stories now. If that makes me a symbol, then so be it. But don't mistake reality for performance." The audience erupted in applause. The journalist tried to press further, but it was clear the people in the room were with Camille. Then came the moment that no one expected. From the back of the hall, a woman rose and identified herself. It was Clara. She looked smaller without her uniform, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard. "I know I shouldn't be here," she began, trembling. "But I need to say this. I was wrong. I was cruel. And I can't undo it. But I want to change. Miss Harrington, I want to learn. Will you allow me that chance?" The air thickened with tension. The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of Camille's face. For a moment, she closed her eyes, as though weighing not just Clara's request, but the expectations of everyone watching. When she spoke, her words were both firm and compassionate. "Clara, what you did was unacceptable, and forgiveness is not a gift you can demand. It's something you must earn through action. If you're sincere, then prove it. Use your voice to dismantle the culture that created you. Don't ask me to absolve you. Ask yourself how you will make amends." The room fell into thoughtful silence. Clara nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she seemed stripped of the armor she had carried all her life. The journalist, sensing the gravity, closed the session not with a question, but with a statement. "Tonight, we witnessed something rare: accountability met with possibility. The story of Harrington Aviation is still being written." After the event, Camille retreated backstage, where Angela and Gerald Marks waited. Gerald looked pale. "That was risky," he muttered. "Letting Clara speak, it could have gone very badly." Camille shook her head. "Riskier would have been silence. People need to see that even those who fall can choose to rise. Whether she does or not is up to her. But the choice had to be made visible." Angela, still emotional, whispered, "You gave her a chance without letting her off the hook. That's strength." But later, alone in her office, Camille allowed herself the honesty she rarely showed. She sat by the window, the Chicago skyline glittering against the night. and let the exhaustion wash over her. She remembered her childhood, her mother teaching her that dignity was non-negotiable, her father reminding her that power was useless unless it lifted others. She thought of that slap, sharp against her cheek, and how it had reignited lessons she had almost forgotten in the comfort of boardrooms. Her phone buzzed. A message from David Monroe. The hardest battles are not against others, but against what the world teaches us to accept. You fought back. Don't lose sight of that. Camille exhaled, steadying herself. Tomorrow would bring another fight: lawsuits, shareholder rebellions, regulatory hearings, but tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet truth. She was not fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for transformation. And as the city pulsed beneath her, she realized that this fight, unlike the slap, was not about a single blow. It was about the echoes that would ripple long after, shaping skies and souls alike. The boardroom at Harrington Aviation was a theater of tension. Polished oak tables gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, but the atmosphere was anything but polished. The directors sat stiffly, their faces carved into masks of impatience, fear, and in some cases, quiet anger. Camille Harrington took her seat at the head of the table, her calm presence a striking contrast to the storm building inside the room. Gerald Marks shifted uncomfortably beside her. He had warned her that this meeting would be brutal, that some members were pushing for her resignation to protect the company's image. But Camille had refused to prepare a resignation letter. Instead, she prepared the truth. The chairman, Leonard Briggs, cleared his throat. "Ms. Harrington, let's get straight to it. The incident on Flight 227 has cost us nearly 12% in stock value. Media scrutiny is relentless. Investors are rattled. We need to discuss your leadership in light of these losses." Camille folded her hands, her voice even. "Losses come in many forms. Mr. Briggs, some you measure in percentages, others you measure in people's trust. I will not sacrifice the second to protect the first." A ripple of disapproval circled the table. One board member, a sharp-eyed woman named Fiona Kent, leaned forward. "With respect, trust doesn't keep the lights on. Investors care about stability, not crusades. And right now, you've turned us into a political lightning rod." Angela Cruz, seated at the far end as an observer, flinched at the word crusade. She wanted to speak, but Gerald gave her a subtle shake of the head. This was dangerous ground. Camille, however, didn't flinch. If standing for dignity makes us a lightning rod, then so be it. Lightning clears the sky. Another director slammed his hand against the table. "This is reckless idealism. You're risking everything we've built for the sake of a personal grievance." That word personal ignited something sharper in Camille. She rose slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. Was it personal when passengers were told they didn't belong in first class because of their skin? Was it personal when countless complaints were buried under customer image policies? No, it was systemic. I am not here to fight for myself. I am here to fight for the people whose voices have been silenced. If you think that is reckless, then you have misunderstood what leadership is. The room fell into uneasy silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Leonard leaned back, his lips pursed. Bold words, but bold words don't pay dividends. "What's your plan, Ms. Harrington? How do you turn this narrative around before we're swallowed whole?" Camille reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. She slid it across the table. "The plan is already in motion. I call it the Clear Skies Initiative. transparent reporting of passenger complaints, independent oversight committees, mandatory training for all employees on dignity and bias, and mentorship pathways for underrepresented staff. We don't just patch the system, we rebuild it. The board members flipped through the documents, skimming charts and timelines. Some frowned, others whispered. Gerald studied their faces, his heart pounding. Fiona scoffed. This is ambitious to the point of delusion. The costs alone, the costs of silence are higher. Camille Caron. We've paid them for years. Settlements, lawsuits, PR disasters hidden under non-disclosure agreements. You know this. You've signed the checks. Now it's time we invested in prevention instead of cover-ups. A murmur of agreement rippled through the younger directors, though the older ones remained resistant. Suddenly, Angela stood, her voice trembling but resolute. I was there, she said. All eyes turned to her. She swallowed hard but pressed on. I saw how Clara treated Ms. Harrington. I saw the small humiliations that built up before the slap, and I was too afraid to stop it. If you think this is just about one incident, you're wrong. This is real. It happens every day to people who don't have Miss Harrington's power. If we ignore it, we're part of it. The room was stunned into silence. Angela's cheeks burned, but she didn't sit back down. Camille watched her with quiet pride, letting the young woman's words echo. Finally, Leonard exhaled. Very well. We'll put the initiative to a vote. The tally was closer than Camille expected. But when the final hand went up, the Clear Skies initiative passed by a narrow margin. Relief flooded the room for some, while resentment simmered in others. Fiona shook her head, muttering. You've just tied us to a sinking ship, Camille answered quietly. No, I've turned us toward the horizon. Whether you sink or sail depends on whether you're willing to change. Later, after the meeting had adjourned, Gerald approached Camille privately. His voice was low, filled with awe. You nearly lost them, but you didn't. Do you realize what you just did? Camille gave a tired smile. I didn't win a vote. Gerald, I opened a door. Now we'll see who has the courage to walk through it. That night, she returned to her apartment overlooking the lake. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. Yet the battle was far from over. Tomorrow would bring lawsuits, regulatory hearings, and more media firestorms. But tonight, she sat in the quiet, listening to the waves lap against the shore, knowing that the skies were just beginning to clear. The morning after the Clear Skies initiative passed, the headlines were relentless. Some praised Camille Harrington as a visionary who had forced an industry reckoning. Others painted her as a reckless idealist, risking the stability of an empire. Investors remained divided, and while the public rallied behind her, the financial press buzzed with speculation of a power play brewing in the shadows. That speculation soon proved true. Victor Castellano, the corporate raider Camille had warned Gerald Marx about, stepped into the spotlight. At a press conference in New York, he declared his intent to buy up shares of Harrington Aviation, positioning himself as the savior who would restore stability. The skies need order, not experiments, Castellano announced, his Italian-accented voice dripping with confidence. Passengers don't care about hashtags. They care about safety, reliability, and profit-driven leadership. I can give them that. The message was clear. Castellano intended to strip the company back to numbers, erasing Camille's reforms in the process. The threat was existential. Inside headquarters, Gerald's face was pale as he delivered the news. He's already secured nearly 7% of voting shares. If he pushes a takeover, We could lose control. Angela Cruz sat quietly at the table, her eyes darting between Gerald and Camille. "What happens if he wins?" she asked softly. Camille answered without hesitation. "If he wins, every step we've taken dies. The stories passengers shared will be buried again. The Clear Skies initiative will be dismantled. And Clara's slap will be remembered only as a PR disaster, not a turning point." The weight of her words hung heavy in the room. David Monroe joined via video call, his image grainy, but his presence unmistakable. "Then you can't let him win," he said firmly. "You need allies. The public is with you, but shareholders will follow money unless you show them something stronger. Show them this isn't a liability. Show them it's the future." Camille nodded slowly. "You're right. We fight not just in boardrooms, but in hearts. If Castellano plays numbers, we play people." The next week became a blur of strategy. Camille launched a campaign not just to shareholders, but to the world. She hosted forums with passengers who had been humiliated on flights, their stories broadcast across major networks. She invited employees to speak candidly, giving faces and voices to the change she envisioned. Angela, still shaky, but braver with each step, became one of those voices. She appeared in a campaign video, speaking about her fear of standing up to Clara and how the Clear Skies initiative had given her the courage to change. "If it can change me," she said into the camera, "it can change anyone." The clip went viral, hailed as one of the most authentic moments in the campaign. But Castellano was ruthless. He flooded the airwaves with ads painting Camille as unstable, using dramatic images of plunging stock graphs and ominous taglines like, "Can you trust your safety to chaos?" He courted the older board members with promises of quick profit and threatened to pull long-standing contracts if he gained control. At one particularly tense meeting, Fiona Kent confronted Camille directly. "Castellano has the money. He has the momentum. If we dig in our heels, we may all be out of jobs." Camille met her eyes. "If we surrender, we'll have jobs but no soul. And you know as well as I do that soulless companies don't last. Which legacy do you want? Fiona 1/4 of profits, or a future where passengers believe in us again?" For the first time, Fiona faltered. She didn't agree outright, but she didn't argue either. It was a crack in the armor, small but visible. Meanwhile, Clara Miles reappeared in an unexpected way. After her emotional plea at the town hall, she had avoided cameras, working quietly with advocacy groups. But now she released a public statement, denouncing Castellano and supporting Camille's reforms. "I am the product of a broken culture," she admitted. "Ms. Harrington could have destroyed me, but instead she demanded I take responsibility. I believe in her vision. The skies need her leadership, not Castellano's." The statement shocked everyone. Some accused Camille of orchestrating it, but those who knew Clara's guilt recognized the sincerity. The irony was sharp. The very woman who had humiliated Camille was now one of her strongest defenders. As the shareholder vote approached, tension reached a fever pitch. The media framed it as a duel between two visions, Castellano's stripped-down, profit-first model versus Camille's dignity-driven, systemic reform. Analysts called it a battle for the soul of the skies. On the eve of the vote, Camille stood alone in her office, gazing out at the city lights. Doubt gnawed at her for the first time in weeks. What if the shareholders chose profit over principle? What if all she had built collapsed in one vote? Her phone buzzed. A message from Angela. "Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you. You changed me. You changed a lot of us. That matters more than any vote." Camille smiled faintly, the tension in her chest easing. She thought of her parents again, of their lessons, of the dignity they had instilled in her long before she had power. She realized that win or lose, the change had already begun, but she wasn't ready to lose. The next morning, the shareholder meeting began. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled for position, and both Castellano and Camille arrived flanked by their teams. Castellano exuded swagger, shaking hands, smiling for cameras. Camille walked with quiet purpose, her expression serene, but her eyes burning with resolve. The vote would decide not only the future of Harrington Aviation, but also the message sent to an entire industry. Was dignity worth fighting for, even at a cost? Or would the skies belong to those who measured only in dollars and charts? As Camille stepped to the podium, the room hushed. This was her moment. The grand ballroom of the Harrington Aviation headquarters had been transformed into a battlefield of polished speeches and restless shareholders. Rows of chairs stretched to the back of the hall, filled with men and women holding ballots and expectations. Cameras lined the sides, capturing every flicker of expression, every whispered aside. It wasn't just a vote, it was a spectacle, and the world was watching. Camille Harrington stood at the podium, the Harrington Aviation logo glowing faintly on the screen behind her. She felt the gravity of the moment press down, but she steadied her breathing, reminding herself that she wasn't here to save her position. She was here to defend the soul of what she believed the skies could be. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice low but resonant, "we are here today because a single act of violence exposed something far larger than one flight attendant or one passenger. It revealed the cracks in our culture, the silent policies, the overlooked complaints, the quiet humiliations endured by people who paid to be treated with dignity but received disdain instead. We cannot hide from this truth any longer." Her eyes swept across the room. Some faces were wary, others hostile, but many more than she expected were open, listening. She continued, "Yes, our stock fell. Yes, we faced embarrassment. But ask yourselves, would you rather have a company that hides its shame, or one that faces it, reforms it, and builds something better? The Clear Skies Initiative is not a gamble. It is an investment, not just in profits, but in trust. And trust is what will keep us flying long after quick profits fade." A murmur rippled through the hall, some nodding, others shifting uneasily. Then Victor Castellano rose from his seat at the front row, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. He walked to the podium with a predator's smile. "Trust," he repeated, drawing out the word like a mockery. "Trust doesn't pay dividends. Trust doesn't keep planes in the air. Trust doesn't satisfy shareholders who've seen their value drop 12% in 2 weeks." He turned, addressing the crowd like a seasoned actor. "I offer you stability. I offer you profit. I offer you leadership untainted by scandal. Vote for me, and Harrington Aviation becomes strong again. Vote for her, and we all remain hostages to her crusade." Applause broke out in pockets of the room. Camille remained still, her hands folded, watching him with the composure of someone who knew that noise did not equal truth. When Castellano stepped aside, the moderator announced that questions from shareholders would follow before the vote. A man in his 60s stood. "Mr. Castellano speaks of stability. Ms. Harrington, can you guarantee us that your reforms won't bankrupt us before they heal us?" Camille answered without hesitation. "No reform guarantees instant profit, but I can guarantee this: the cost of doing nothing is higher. Every settlement, every scandal, every hidden story waiting to surface that is the true bankruptcy. What we build now ensures not just survival, but respect." Another shareholder, a woman in her 40s, raised her hand. "If you lose this vote, Ms. Harrington, What happens to the Clear Skies Initiative? Camille's gaze did not falter. If I lose, it dies here. If I win, it becomes our legacy. The choice is yours. Angela Cruz, seated toward the back, felt her chest tighten. She wanted desperately to speak, to add her voice, but shareholders weren't taking testimony from staff. Yet fate had other plans. From the side of the hall, the moderator suddenly announced, "We have allowed for one testimonial from the employee side. To give context, Miss Cruz, will you join us?" Angela's heart pounded as she rose. Her legs shook, but as she approached the podium, Camille gave her a small nod of encouragement. "My name is Angela Cruz," she began, voice trembling but growing steadier with each word. "I was on Flight 2000. I saw what happened. I saw Clara Miles humiliate Ms. Harrington step by step before she finally struck her, and I did nothing, not because I agreed, but because I was afraid. The truth is, our culture made me afraid to speak up, afraid to lose my job. The Clear Skies Initiative isn't just policy, it's hope. It's a promise that no one has to choose between integrity and survival. If you kill it, you're not just protecting profits, you're protecting fear." Her words echoed in the hushed hall. Even some of Castellanos' staunchest allies looked uneasy. Finally, the moderator called for the vote. Ballots were cast, hands raised electronically, and the count began. The process felt excruciatingly slow, each percentage flashing on the screen like a heartbeat. Castellano leaned back in his chair, smirking, whispering to his aide. Camille sat still, her face serene, but her palms damp against the table. Angela clasped her hands together, whispering a silent prayer she hadn't said since childhood. The tally climbed 40%, 45, 49. Castellano surged ahead briefly, his grin widening. Then Camille's numbers caught up. 51, 52, 53. The room grew restless, whispers filling the air. Finally, the last count appeared Camille Harrington, 54%. Victor Castellano, 46%. The room erupted, some in applause, some in dismay. Castellanos' face darkened, his jaw tight with rage. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over," he hissed, pointing a finger toward Camille. "You've won today, but you'll regret it. Mark my words." He stormed out, cameras flashing in his wake. Camille rose slowly, the room still buzzing with reaction. "Today we chose trust. Today we chose dignity. And from today forward, Harrington Aviation does not simply carry passengers, we carry people. Every seat, every ticket, every face matters. That is our future. This time." The applause was thunderous, overwhelming even the dissenters. Angela felt tears slide down her cheeks, not just from relief, but from pride. David Monroe, watching from home, allowed himself a smile. Even Fiona Kent, once Camille's sharpest critic, joined the applause. Her expression softened with reluctant respect. As the meeting adjourned, Camille walked out into the crisp Chicago air. The fight was far from over, but she had secured the chance to keep fighting. For the first time in weeks, the sky above her felt clear, not because the storm had passed, but because she had weathered it. The echoes of the vote still lingered in Camille Harrington's mind as she sat in the back of the car driving her through Chicago's downtown streets. Skyscrapers reflected the fading sun, glass towers glowing orange, but Camille barely noticed. Her body leaned back into the leather seat, exhausted, her head heavy with the weight of what had just happened. She had won, but it was not the kind of victory that brought rest. It was the kind that demanded more. Angela Cruz sat beside her, still visibly stunned. "I can't believe they let me speak," she said softly, almost as if she were afraid someone might take it back. Camille turned to her. They didn't let you. You earned that moment. And you made it matter. Angela's eyes glistened. I thought my voice wouldn't count. I was just a junior attendant. But when I spoke, they listened. They listened. Camille agreed. Because you told the truth. And truth has a way of cutting through noise, no matter how loud. The car pulled up to the Harrington Aviation headquarters. A crowd had gathered outside. Not angry protesters this time, but supporters. Some held signs with words Camille hadn't seen in the airline industry before: dignity at 30,000 feet. Every seat. Equal seat. Clear skies. Now, cameras flashed as she stepped out. Angela close behind. People cheered. Not just shareholders, but ordinary citizens who had watched the story unfold on screens across the nation. Inside, the building was quieter. Gerald Marks was waiting in the lobby, his shoulders sagging with relief. You pulled it off, he said with a tired smile. Barely. But enough. Barely is still victory, Camille replied. He nodded, but leaned closer. We need to be careful. Castellano doesn't take losses well. He'll be back. Camille knew he was right. She could almost feel Victor Castellano's presence, his rage simmering like a storm just beyond the horizon. But she pushed the thought aside for now. Then let's make his return irrelevant. Let's prove that reform is not weakness. That evening, the boardroom became a war room again. Camille gathered her closest allies, Gerald, Angela, David Monroe, who had flown in after the vote, and Fiona Kent, the once skeptical board member who now seemed ready to stand beside her. Fiona spoke first. Camille, I owe you an apology. I doubted you, thought you were reckless. But today, I saw what you saw. This isn't just a business crisis. It's a moral one, and you faced it head on. Camille inclined her head, grateful but not triumphal. I don't need apologies, Fiona. I need commitment, because we've only won the right to start this work. Now we actually have to do it. David Monroe, the older passenger whose voice had been one of the earliest to defend her, leaned forward. You've already lit a fire. People are talking, on talk shows, in community forums, even in churches. They're saying, finally, someone in power gets it. But you have to deliver now. If you falter, they'll all turn cynical again. Camille's eyes hardened with resolve. Then we won't falter. Angela, still processing her sudden leap into visibility, looked at the folder of documents Marcus Chen had helped compile the complaint files, the gatekeeper chat logs, the coded memos. We have enough evidence here to expose an entire culture of discrimination, she whispered. Expose it, Camille said simply. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. But as the night stretched on and strategies turned into action plans, Camille found herself stepping away for a brief moment. She walked down the quiet corridor of the nearly empty headquarters, her heels echoing softly. She needed space, a moment to breathe. She stopped by a window overlooking the city. Chicago twinkled below, alive and restless. She thought of her father, who used to take her to O'Hare Airport just to watch planes take off. The sky belongs to everyone, he would tell her, pointing upward as jets disappeared into the clouds. Never let anyone tell you where you can or can't belong. Tears pricked Camille's eyes at the memory. He had been gone for years, but tonight, his words returned as if he were standing beside her. That was why she had fought not just for herself, but for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. It was a message from an unknown number. You may have won today, but tomorrow belongs to me. V. C. Camille stared at the letters. Victor Castellano. The storm was indeed coming. The next morning, the media frenzy intensified. Camille's face was on every screen morning shows. Headlines, op-eds dissecting every gesture, every phrase from her speech. Some called her a visionary. Others accused her of turning business into politics. But amidst the noise, a single voice rose above Senator Eleanor Briggs. She appeared on national television praising Camille's courage and announcing her intention to push for federal hearings on discrimination in aviation. "This is bigger than one airline," the senator declared. "This is about how America treats people in every industry where service intersects with dignity. Ms. Harrington has opened the door. We must walk through it." Camille watched the clip in her office, both proud and wary. Attention at this level meant allies, but it also meant enemies. Castellano would weaponize the narrative of politics over profit. She had to be ready. Later that afternoon, she met with Angela again. Angela's hands trembled as she held a fresh stack of letters. These came in this morning, from passengers, from employees, from strangers. Stories of humiliation, of small cruelties in the skies, and of gratitude that someone is finally listening. Camille sifted through them, a young mother who had been told to move because her baby was too disruptive for first class. An elderly veteran who had been laughed at for needing assistance to his seat. A teenage girl whose accent was mocked by a flight attendant. Each story was another reminder that her fight was not abstract. It was human. "Angela," Camille said quietly, "I want you to lead a task force to compile these stories. We'll turn them into a public report, real voices, real pain. We're not just going to reform quietly. We're going to show the world why reform matters." Angela's eyes widened. "Me lead a task force." "Yes," Camille said firmly. "You spoke truth to power yesterday. Now I need you to speak for those who don't have the stage." Angela's chest swelled with both fear and pride. "I'll do it." That evening, Camille returned home to her penthouse apartment overlooking the lake. For the first time in days, she was alone. She poured herself a glass of water, sat at the table, and allowed the silence to surround her. But silence did not bring peace. Her mind wrestled with doubts. Could she really sustain this fight? Could one woman, even one billionaire CEO, truly change an industry built on hierarchies and appearances? What if Castellano rallied enough shareholders to strike again? What if customers lost patience with the turbulence of reform? She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "You didn't fight this hard to stop now." Her phone rang, startling her. It was her mother, a retired school teacher who lived quietly in Atlanta. "Camille, I saw you on television," her mother said, her voice trembling with both pride and worry. "Your father would be so proud. But baby, are you safe? That man, Castellano, he looked dangerous." Camille swallowed. "I'm safe. Mama, I promise. And I have to do this. For Dad. For everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." Her mother was quiet for a long moment before replying. "Then do it. But don't lose yourself in the fight. Promise me you'll still be my Camille when this is over." "I promise," Camille whispered, her throat tight. When she hung up, she stepped out onto her balcony. The city stretched beneath her, the lake reflecting the moonlight. For a brief moment, the sky felt hers again, wide, endless, filled with possibility. But in the shadows of another skyscraper, Victor Castellano was holding a private dinner with allies, plotting his next move. He wasn't finished. He would never accept defeat easily, and Camille knew it. Tomorrow, the battle would begin again. The week after the shareholder vote was a blur of movement. headlines, and hidden battles. Camille Harrington had expected resistance, but the sheer force of it surprised even her. Each morning she woke to a flood of news clippings, social media storms, and emails from investors demanding updates. And beneath it all, Victor Castellano's shadow loomed. On Monday, her assistant handed her a stack of documents. "These were leaked overnight," she said nervously. The papers were filled with cherry-picked statistics, rising legal costs, potential profit losses from reforms, internal emails taken out of context. Castellano's team had fed them to financial journalists, framing Camille as reckless, endangering shareholder value with her crusade. By noon, business networks ran segments titled, "Is Harrington Aviation Doomed?" by its CEO's social experiment. The markets responded with volatility. Stock prices wavered. Camille sat in her office watching the reports. Angela Cruz stood at her side, eyes wide. "They're twisting everything." "That's what he does," Camille said quietly. "He turns fear into leverage, but fear won't fly forever." Still, she felt the sting. Her reforms weren't even fully implemented, and already the narrative was shifting against her. She knew she had to strike back not with words alone, but with undeniable action. That afternoon, she called Gerald Marks and Fiona Kent into her office. "We're accelerating Phase 1 of Clear Skies," she told them. "Training begins next week. Passenger advocates will be assigned to test flights within the month, and Angela's task force will release our first report in 2 weeks. Fiona hesitated. "Camille, are you sure?" "If we rush and stumble, Castellano will use it as proof you're incompetent." Camille looked at her with steady eyes. "If we delay, he'll say we were bluffing. I'd rather fail moving forward than fall by standing still." Gerald nodded slowly. "Then let's move." Meanwhile, Castellano was not idle. He convened a closed-door meeting at a private club in Manhattan, surrounded by a handful of sharp-eyed financiers. They drank expensive wine while plotting their next steps. "She won the vote." "Barely," Castellano said, pacing, "but her reforms are a liability. If we can't push her out directly, we'll bleed her dry. Lawsuits, PR disasters, anything to raise doubts." One of his allies smirked. "There are plenty of disgruntled employees who'd be willing to talk. All we need is one scandal." "Find it," Castellano ordered. "And if you can't find it, make it." Back in Chicago, Camille was meeting with Angela's task force for the first time. They had spread out across a conference table, the folders of passenger testimonies stacked like fragile bricks. Angela led the discussion nervously, but with growing confidence. "This is more than stories," she said. "It's patterns. People from different backgrounds experiencing the same humiliations being told to prove their tickets, being mocked for accents, being moved from first class because they didn't look right. It's systemic." Camille listened intently. "We'll publish these in waves. One story alone can be dismissed. 100 stories cannot. They will show that this isn't my fight alone. It belongs to all of them." Angela nodded, her fear giving way to purpose. "We'll make it undeniable." But the next day brought a twist Camille hadn't anticipated. As she arrived at headquarters, reporters swarmed her with questions about a leaked internal memo. "Ms. Harrington, did you personally authorize the termination of employees without due process?" Confused, Camille pushed through the crowd and reached her office. Gerald was waiting, holding the so-called memo. "It's fake," he said grimly. "A forgery. It claims you ordered mass firings based on race quotas. Castellano's fingerprints are all over this." Camille's stomach turned. "If people believe this, they already do," Gerald said. "Social media is on fire. We need a counter immediately." That night, Camille went live in a streamed address. She stood at a simple podium, no makeup beyond what the lights required, her voice firm but calm. Today, a false document was circulated claiming I authorized discriminatory firings. Let me be clear, I did not. What I did authorize was accountability for those who protected discrimination. That is very different. The people who want to stop reform are desperate. They will lie, forge, and twist. But truth will outlast them. It always does. Her words resonated, but she knew the fight was far from over. Castellano wasn't just attacking her reputation, he was testing her endurance. Late that night, Camille sat alone again, scrolling through the testimonies Angela had gathered. One in particular stopped her. It was a letter from a man in Detroit, an immigrant who had worked 3 jobs to afford a trip for his daughter's graduation. He had been denied boarding because a flight attendant insisted his credit card looked suspicious. He wrote, "My daughter graduated without me there. I missed the proudest moment of her life. I will never forget her tears." Camille closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down. She whispered to herself, "This is why." Her phone rang. It was Senator Eleanor Briggs. "Camille, I just got word. Castellanos' lobbyists are pushing against the hearings. They're saying reform will destabilize the industry." "Of course they are," Camille muttered. "What do you need from me?" "Public pressure," Briggs replied. "We need these hearings to be too popular to block. Bring your stories forward. Make it impossible for Congress to look away." Camille exhaled. "Then that's what we'll do." The following morning, she held a press conference. This time she didn't speak from prepared notes. Instead, she invited Angela to the podium. Angela read aloud some of the testimonies, her voice breaking at times, but carrying the rawness of truth. A hush fell over the room as reporters listened to voices that had long been silenced. By the end, several were visibly moved. One asked, "Harrington, what do you say to shareholders who claim these reforms are too costly?" Camille stepped forward. "I say this: the true cost is in lost humanity. We can measure dollars, but how do you measure a father missing his daughter's graduation? How do you measure a child who learns too young that her family doesn't belong? That's the cost I refuse to accept." The room erupted in questions, but Camille knew she had struck the right chord. The hashtag #DeSky belongs to all began trending within hours. But as momentum built on her side, Castellano moved again. By Thursday, anonymous sources leaked that Harrington Aviation was under federal investigation for financial mismanagement. Though untrue, the story spread fast enough to rattle investors once more. That evening, Camille sat in her office staring at the city skyline. Angela entered hesitantly. "You look tired," she said gently. "I am tired," Camille admitted, "but I can't afford to stop. He's betting I'll burn out. He doesn't know that I've been tired before. Tired of being told I didn't belong. Tired of watching others humiliated while no one spoke up. Tired is not new. Fighting is." Angela smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's your strength. You don't fight because it's easy. You fight because you've already survived harder." Camille reached across the table, touching the stack of letters again. "We're going to win this. Not because I'm a CEO, not because I'm a billionaire, but because people deserve better. And somewhere in Manhattan." Victor Castellano raised a glass of wine, watching her speech replay on a muted television. His smirk returned. "Fight all you want. Camille, I'll still own the sky when you're done." But deep down, for the first time, even he wondered if this woman was more resilient than he had calculated. The marble steps of Capitol Hill gleamed under the morning sun as Camille Harrington ascended them, flanked by Angela Cruz and Gerald Marks. The halls of Congress buzzed with the anticipation of the day's hearing, one that would not only determine the future of Harrington Aviation, but also ripple across the entire airline industry. News crews clustered outside, shouting questions as microphones thrust forward. "Ms. Harrington, are you prepared to defend your reforms? What do you say to investors who claim your policies are sinking profits? Do you see yourself as a crusader or just a CEO in crisis?" Camille paused briefly at the top of the steps, her dark suit immaculate, her expression calm but determined. "I'm not here to be a crusader," she said evenly, her voice carrying over the commotion. "I'm here to tell the truth. And the truth is that dignity in the skies is not optional. It's essential. Inside." The hearing room was packed. Rows of senators, staffers, reporters, and industry lobbyists filled every seat. At the front sat Senator Eleanor Briggs, who had called for this hearing. She gave Camille a subtle nod as she entered. Across the aisle, Victor Castellano was already seated at a separate table, his lawyers whispering in his ear. His smirk was thin but deliberate, the look of a man who believed politics was just another market to conquer. When the gavel struck, silence fell. Senator Briggs began. "Today we address allegations of systemic discrimination in the airline industry and the reforms proposed by Harrington Aviation under Ms. Camille Harrington's leadership. Ms. Harrington, you may begin with your opening statement." Camille rose, steadying herself. She remembered her father's words about the sky belonging to everyone. She remembered the slap that had started it all. And then she spoke. "Thank you, Senator. I never asked for this fight, but it came to me in the form of humiliation, and it revealed something larger than my personal pain. I discovered an industry where certain faces are treated as less deserving, where policies quietly enable prejudice, and where silence protects abusers. That silence ends today. The Clear Skies Initiative is not charity. It is not politics. It is business rooted in humanity. And without humanity, no business deserves to fly." The room was quiet, her words landing heavy. Castellano's lawyer shot up. "With respect, this is a hearing on economics and safety, not poetry." Senator Briggs lifted a hand. "You'll have your turn. Continue, Ms. Harrington." Camille gestured to Angela, who approached the microphone with shaking hands but unwavering eyes. "I was there," Angela said softly, "on the flight where Ms. Harrington was struck by a flight attendant. I didn't intervene because I was afraid of losing my job. That fear is what keeps people silent. It's what lets injustice thrive. These reforms are not abstract to me. They're survival." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Next, Camille presented the compiled passenger testimonies. Screens lit up with letters and recordings. An elderly veteran describing being mocked. A mother breaking down as she recalled being told she didn't belong in first class with her toddler. A businessman recounting being pulled aside repeatedly because his last name sounded foreign. "These are not isolated incidents," Camille said, her voice thick with controlled emotion. "They are patterns, and patterns demand change." Then Castellano took his turn. He rose with the confidence of a seasoned predator. "Senators, let's not be fooled by emotional theatrics. Ms. Harrington is playing to the crowd, spinning isolated events into an industry-wide crisis. But let's talk numbers since her so-called reforms began. Harrington Aviation's share price has dropped. Investors are fleeing. The industry cannot run on feelings. It runs on profit, safety, and discipline. And I assure you, her crusade threatens all three." Applause broke out among some lobbyists in the back. Castellano seized on it. If you want safe skies, you need order, not chaos. If you want prosperity, you need stability, not experiments. If you want freedom, you don't need social engineering. You need strong leadership. That is what I offer. For a moment, the weight of his rhetoric pressed hard. Senators whispered. Cameras zoomed in on Camille's face. She stood again, refusing to let his words dominate. Mr. Castellano speaks of order and profit. But what order is it when a veteran is mocked for asking for help? What profit do you count when a father misses his daughter's graduation? What stability exists in an industry that silences its workers out of fear? True strength is not measured in dollars alone. It is measured in whether the people you serve trust you. And if we lose that, we lose everything. Her words drew applause from the gallery, despite the chair's attempts to quiet them. The questioning began. Some senators pressed Camille on costs. Others pressed Castellano on his tactics. One asked Angela, "Do you regret not speaking up sooner?" Angela's eyes filled with tears. "Every day. But regret is why I'm speaking now. I refuse to be silent again." By midday, the hearing had reached its peak. Senator Briggs leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Mr. Castellano, are you aware of the forged memo circulated under Ms. Harrington's name?" Castellano smirked. "Rumors. I deal in facts." Then explain why the metadata of that file traces back to a server connected to one of your firms. The room erupted. Castellano's smirk faltered for the first time. Reporters shouted questions. Senators demanded answers. Camille remained quiet, watching. She hadn't expected Briggs to reveal that so boldly, but she felt a swell of gratitude. The tide was shifting. As the hearing drew to a close, Briggs concluded, "This committee will continue its investigation, but let today be clear. Discrimination in the skies is not a trivial matter. It is a national concern. Ms. Harrington, thank you for your courage. Mr. Castellano, you may have more to answer for than you realize." Outside, the crowd erupted into cheers for Camille as she exited. Angela walked beside her, tears streaming, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Gerald clasped her shoulder with quiet pride. Camille paused at the top of the steps once again, looking out over the sea of faces. For the first time since the slap that had set everything in motion, she felt something different, not just pain or duty, but hope. Hope that maybe the skies could change. Yet as she descended the steps, she caught sight of a Castellano watching from a distance, his expression cold, calculating. He wasn't finished, and she knew it. The hearing had ended with Camille Harrington walking out to thunderous applause. But applause was fleeting. By the time she reached Chicago that evening, the storm clouds of retaliation had already begun to gather. Her phone rang before she even stepped off the jet bridge. It was Gerald Marks, his tone strained. "Camille, we've got a problem. Several key suppliers just called. They're threatening to pull out of their contracts if we don't scale back Clear Skies. And guess who's suddenly investing in their parent companies?" "Castellano," Camille said flatly. Not as a question, but as a confirmation. "Exactly," Gerald replied. "He's trying to choke us from the inside out." Camille's chest tightened. She had expected pushback, but the precision of Castellano's counterattack was almost surgical. He wasn't just playing the public narrative, he was targeting the bones of her company. Later that night, Camille convened her inner circle again. Angela Cruz was there, her nerves evident, but her eyes burning with determination. Fiona Kent joined via secure video call, while David Monroe sat quietly, his old hands folded on the table as if bracing against turbulence. "We can't outspend Castellano," Fiona said bluntly. "If he keeps buying influence in the supply chain, we'll be cornered." Angela leaned forward. "Then maybe the answer isn't fighting him with money. It's fighting him with voices. The testimonies we've gathered, they're powerful. They've already changed how the public sees this. If suppliers pull out now, they'll look complicit." Gerald frowned. "That's risky. Suppliers don't like being dragged into public fights. But they don't like being boycotted either," Angela shot back. Camille watched the exchange, weighing it. She saw in Angela the same fearlessness she herself had once learned to cultivate. "Angela's right," she said finally. "We'll turn transparency into our shield. If Castellano wants to operate in shadows, we'll flood the room with light." The next morning, Harrington Aviation launched a digital platform called Voices at Altitude. It featured verified passenger and employee testimonies, anonymized where necessary, but raw and unfiltered. Stories scrolled across the screen, moments of humiliation, resilience, and longing for change. Within hours, the platform went viral. Customers began tagging suppliers on social media. "Are you standing with dignity or with silence?" By noon, one of the threatened suppliers reversed course, announcing they would honor their contracts in the spirit of accountability and reform. The others hesitated, wary of being cast as enablers of discrimination. Camille felt a flicker of relief, but it didn't last. That evening, an anonymous tip landed on a major news outlet allegations that Harrington Aviation had mishandled safety inspections. The story spread fast, painting Camille as reckless and endangering passengers in her quest for reform. At headquarters, Gerald stormed into her office with the report in hand. "This has Castellano written all over it." Camille skimmed the article, her jaw tightening. "Do we have proof?" "Not yet, but I'll find it," Gerald vowed. Angela sat across the table, her face pale. People are already posting online saying reform is a distraction from safety. Camille leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. She could feel the tug-of-war inside her, one side demanding she defend herself aggressively, the other warning that overreaction would validate Castellano's smear. When she opened her eyes, her voice was steady. "We respond with facts, not fury. Gerald, get me the inspection records. Angela, reach out to crews who can testify on our behalf. We'll put our safety record against Castellano's lies any day." 2 days later, Camille appeared live on national television, flanked by captains and engineers with decades of spotless records. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She simply presented the data zero incidents tied to her reforms. A safety record stronger than industry average, corroborated by independent auditors. "Safety is not negotiable," she said firmly, "and anyone who suggests otherwise is exploiting fear for profit." The calm authority of her delivery resonated. The smear lost traction, though whispers still lingered. That night, Camille returned home and allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. She sat by her window, staring at the city lights. Doubt gnawed at her edges. Was she truly strong enough to withstand Castellano's relentless attacks? Was her vision of dignity in the skies worth dragging thousands of employees through turmoil? Her phone buzzed. It was a video message from her mother. "Baby, I saw you tonight. You look tired, but strong. Don't let him steal your spirit. Remember, your father always said the sky was big enough for everyone. Don't let anyone make it smaller." Camille smiled faintly, her mother's words a balm against her inner battle. She whispered back into the empty room, "I won't." But while Camille steadied herself, Castellano escalated further. He met with a coalition of rival airlines in a private suite, presenting them with a plan. Harrington Aviation is vulnerable. If we isolate them, force their contracts into default, we can absorb their routes. And when Camille falls, every other CEO will think twice before entertaining her kind of crusade. The room buzzed with interest. It wasn't just Camille he was trying to destroy. It was the precedent she threatened to set. Back in Chicago, Camille gathered with Angela and Gerald late into the night. Angela showed her an outpouring of support, online passengers posting stories under Hichami's Sky Belongs to All, employees pledging loyalty, even celebrities voicing solidarity. "Look at this," Angela said, scrolling through the feed. "People are fighting for us now. You don't have to carry this alone." Camille's eyes softened. "I know, but Castellano will try to turn their hope into exhaustion. We can't let him." Gerald rubbed his temples. "We're holding ground, but barely. If Castellano pulls in rivals, this could turn into a full-blown industry war." Camille's voice grew quiet, but unshakable. "Then we won't fight to survive. We'll fight to redefine. If he wants a war, we'll make it about the soul of the skies themselves." Angela looked at her with awe. "Do you really think we can win that kind of war?" Camille gazed out the window, the city skyline reflecting in her eyes. "We don't need to win in the old sense. We just need to make losing impossible for the people who depend on us. If we can do that, then Castellano's victories will turn hollow." That night, as Camille finally allowed herself a few hours of sleep, she dreamed of standing on an open tarmac, the roar of engines all around. The planes lifted one by one into a sky vast and endless, and in the dream, no one was told they didn't belong. When she woke, she knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, she felt something powerful stirring in her chest, not just resolve, but faith. Faith that the sky could still be remade. The storm Camille Harrington had anticipated finally broke open one sleepless Thursday morning. She sat in her office long before dawn, the glow of the skyline muted through heavy fog, when Gerald Marks burst in, holding his phone like a grenade. "It's all over the networks," he said, dropping it on the table. Camille leaned forward, scanning the headline. "Whistleblower claims Harrington Aviation reforms risk passenger lives." Below it, a blurry interview clip showed a man in a pilot's uniform, face partially obscured, claiming that Camille's policies had caused understaffing, rushed schedules, and reckless disregard for safety. Her stomach sank. Who is he? Former pilot. Fired last year for misconduct, Gerald explained. But the interview doesn't mention that. Guess who funded the outlet running the story? Camille didn't need to guess. Castellano's handprints were everywhere, even when invisible. Angela Cruz entered just then, clutching a stack of printed letters. "I've been flooded with new testimonies since the hearing. But this," she paused, noticing the headline. This could undo everything. For a moment, the room was heavy with silence. Camille set the phone down, pressing her palms together. She could feel the doubt nibbling at her edges again, whispering that maybe Castellano was too big, his reach too long. Then she exhaled slowly. "We fight with truth. We always have." By mid-morning, Camille held a press conference with her captains and safety officers, one by one. They spoke of rigorous checks, strengthened training, and how reforms had only increased accountability. Captain Lewis, a veteran pilot with 30 years in the cockpit, declared firmly, "I've flown through war zones and hurricanes. Harrington Aviation has never compromised safety under Ms. Harrington's leadership. Anyone saying otherwise is playing politics with passengers' trust." The statement blunted the worst of the blow, but the damage lingered. Market analysts kept speculating, questioning, seeding doubt. Castellano didn't need proof. He just needed to erode confidence grain by grain. That evening, Camille retreated to her penthouse balcony, staring out at the restless lake. Angela joined her quietly, bringing 2 cups of tea. "You don't have to keep doing this alone," Angela said softly. Camille's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Alone is how I've fought most of my life. Alone is how people expected me to fail." Angela shook her head. "Not anymore. You gave me a voice when I thought mine didn't matter. You gave all of us one. Let us carry part of this with you." Camille finally turned to her, eyes softening. "Maybe that's the hardest part, believing I don't have to hold it all." The next day, hope flickered unexpectedly. Senator Eleanor Briggs announced that the federal hearings would continue with expanded scope. "We are not only examining Harrington Aviation," she said, "but the entire aviation industry's record on discrimination and dignity. Ms. Harrington's testimony has opened a door, and now we intend to walk through it fully." The announcement ignited headlines across the country. Public attention shifted from Camille alone to the broader industry. Support swelled, with passengers demanding airlines adopt similar reforms. But Castellano countered with ruthless efficiency. He launched a smear campaign painting Camille as power-hungry, claiming she was using reforms as a Trojan horse to consolidate control. He released attack ads featuring actors portraying disgruntled passengers, splicing grainy footage of delays and implying chaos under her watch. Camille watched one of the ads play on a muted television in the boardroom. The distortion was almost laughable, but the intent was deadly serious. She turned the screen off with the remote, her jaw tight. "He's trying to exhaust people's faith in me," she said. Fiona Kent, joining via video call, leaned forward. "Then maybe the answer isn't defending yourself anymore. Maybe it's letting others defend you." Angela nodded quickly. "We already have hundreds of verified testimonies. What if we filmed some of them? Let real people speak. Not scripted, not polished, just truth." Gerald raised an eyebrow. "You think people will listen to strangers over glossy attack ads?" "Not strangers," Angela said firmly. "Fellow passengers, fellow Americans. They'll see themselves." Camille studied her, a slow spark igniting. "Do it. Build a campaign. Not about me, about them. Call it Our Sky, Our Story." Within a week, the campaign launched online. Videos of passengers speaking their truths filled feeds. A grandmother recalling the humiliation of being asked to prove she belonged in business class. A young black student describing how a flight attendant assumed he was in the wrong seat until his white classmate vouched for him. An immigrant family explaining the shame of being asked to step aside while others boarded. The campaign went viral almost instantly. Hashtags multiplied. News anchors replayed clips. Talk shows invited ordinary passengers to share their experiences. The tide of voices was too vast, too authentic for Castellano to drown out. But just as momentum swelled, Camille received another blow. Gerald entered her office late one night, his face pale. "Camille, Castellano's moved faster than we thought. He's bought enough shares through proxies to call for another emergency shareholder vote. He wants to remove you as CEO." Camille felt her breath catch. She had fought so hard to win the last vote, only to face another so soon. The exhaustion pressed heavy on her chest. When she asked, "In 2 weeks," Gerald said grimly. "He's gambling that the smears and the stock volatility will tip the scales this time." Angela's voice broke the silence. "Then we have 2 weeks to remind them why you belong here. 2 weeks to show that this fight is bigger than profits." Camille rose from her chair. the fatigue still clinging to her but her spine straightening. Then 2 weeks is what we'll take. He wants to break us at the point of exhaustion. Instead, we'll make this the breaking point for him. She walked to the window, the city sprawling beneath her like a living organism. Somewhere in Manhattan, Castellano was no doubt toasting his scheme, but Camille felt something steadier in her chest, now a flame that had been tempered, not extinguished, by every attack. She whispered into the glass, more to herself than anyone else. I've been underestimated my whole life. He thinks this is the moment I break. He doesn't know this is the moment I rise. The clock ticked mercilessly toward the shareholder vote, every day feeling like a battlefield Camille Harrington had to cross barefoot over broken glass. 2 weeks. That was all she had to defend, not only her position, but the future of the Clear Skies Initiative. Her headquarters hummed with urgency. Angela Cruz and her team worked late into the night, editing videos for the Our Sky, Our Story campaign. Gerald Marks coordinated with legal teams and investor relations, trying to steady nervous shareholders. Fiona Kent, still cautious but increasingly committed, called in favors among board members to sway votes. Camille, meanwhile, split her time between strategy meetings and personal outreach. She called investors directly, speaking to them not as a CEO delivering numbers, but as a human being sharing vision. Some were swayed, some remained skeptical, and a few confessed they were being pressured by Castellano's camp with veiled threats about future business deals. One evening, after a grueling day of calls, Camille sat alone in her office when David Monroe arrived. The veteran passenger, cane in hand, had become almost like a quiet guardian. "You look like someone who hasn't slept in a week," David said gently. "I haven't," Camille admitted with a weary smile. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear another shareholder's hesitation, another whisper of Castellano's influence." David eased into the chair across from her. "I've lived through wars. Ms. Harrington, you don't beat men like Castellano by matching their noise. You beat them by showing what silence they fear most." "And what silence is that?" she asked. "The silence when ordinary people stop being afraid of him." David replied, "He thrives on fear. Take that away, and he has nothing." Camille let his words sink in. It wasn't just shareholders she needed to reach, it was the broader public, the millions of ordinary people whose pressure could bend even the most stubborn boardroom. The next morning, Angela came rushing into her office, holding her laptop. "You need to see this." On the screen played a new video, not made by her team, but by passengers themselves. A group of high school students had filmed a clip explaining how they had raised money to fly to a debate competition, only to face discriminatory treatment at the airport. They ended the video with a simple line, "We belong in the sky too." It had gone viral overnight, garnering millions of views. Camille's chest tightened. It wasn't just her campaign anymore. The movement had grown beyond her, becoming something organic, unstoppable. But Castellano struck back swiftly. Days later, a glossy campaign ad aired nationally, featuring polished actors and ominous narration. "Camille Harrington risks your safety, your investment, your future. Do you trust her with your skies?" The ad ended with Castellano's name not mentioned, but his fingerprints obvious. The blow rattled shareholders again. Gerald threw the remote against the boardroom table in frustration. "He's poisoning the well faster than we can clean it." Camille, however, remained calm. "Then we stop cleaning. We start planting. Let the truth take root where lies can't choke it out." She announced a town hall series open forum streamed live, where passengers and employees could speak directly. The first session was tense. Angry investors tuned in. Hostile reporters asked loaded questions. But then an elderly black woman stood up in the audience, voice trembling but clear. "I'm 72 years old. I've lived through segregation, through being told to ride in the back, through being told I didn't belong. And when I fly today, sometimes I still feel it. Ms. Harrington, you're the first leader I've seen who says out loud that it's wrong. Don't stop. Please, don't stop." The room went silent. Camille walked off the stage afterward with tears stinging her eyes. That woman's voice carried more weight than any statistic. Behind closed doors. However, Camille's doubts gnawed at her. Late at night, she would sit at her kitchen table, papers scattered around, wondering if her fight was pulling too many into the fire. She thought of her father, of his steady voice telling her the sky belonged to everyone. She thought of her mother's plea not to lose herself in the fight. Sometimes she whispered into the stillness, "Am I losing myself?" One night Angela found her there, still awake at 3 a.m. "You're not losing yourself," Angela said quietly. "You're finding the part of you Castellano wants most to break." Camille looked at her, exhaustion etched across her face. "And what part is that?" "The part that still believes," Angela replied simply. The final week arrived, and the battle reached fever pitch. Castellano flew across cities, holding private dinners with influential investors, promising returns, whispering fears of collapse under Camille's leadership. Meanwhile, Camille continued her town halls, her voice growing hoarse but her resolve sharpening. Senator Briggs called her midweek. "You've ignited something bigger than you realize. If Castellano removes you, the hearings will look like punishment for telling the truth. The country will not stand for it." Camille sighed. "But will shareholders care about the country or their bottom line?" "Make them see those two aren't separate," Briggs urged. "Show them dignity is the bottom line." 2 nights before the vote, Camille received an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet, a threat. "Drop out now, or the next leak won't be about your company. It'll be about you." Her hands trembled as she read it. She thought of scandals fabricated, secrets twisted. Castellano was trying to frighten her into silence at the final hour. Angela found her staring at the paper, frozen. Without a word, she tore it from Camille's hand and ripped it in half. "He doesn't get to decide who you are," Angela said fiercely. For the first time in days, Camille laughed a short, tired laugh, but real. "You're braver than I was at your age," she admitted. "I learned it from watching you," Angela replied, "on the eve of the vote." Camille stood again before her employees. This time she didn't speak as a CEO, but as one of them. "Tomorrow they'll decide if I stay or go. But understand this whether I'm here or not. The truth we've spoken cannot be unheard. The skies belong to all of us. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Applause shook the room. Angela wiped her eyes. Gerald nodded with grim pride. Fiona, on the video feed, whispered, "That's the speech that will echo, no matter how they vote." As Camille left the stage, she felt something she hadn't in weeks. Not victory, not certainty, but peace, because win or lose, she knew the silence was broken, and silence, once broken, could never fully return. The morning of the shareholder meeting dawned gray and heavy over Manhattan, as if the city itself sensed the storm about to break. Camille Harrington stood by her hotel window, sipping coffee she could barely taste. Down below, cameras lined the sidewalks outside the glass tower where the vote would be held. Reporters clustered like gulls at low tide, waiting for a spectacle. Her phone buzzed. It was her mother. "Baby," Evelyn said softly, "I know today feels impossible, but remember, no matter what they decide, you've already changed the conversation. That's something no vote can erase." Camille closed her eyes. "I keep thinking about Dad. He'd have told me to fight with everything I had, but to walk away if it meant losing my soul." "And what does your soul tell you?" Evelyn asked gently. Camille stared at her reflection in the glass. "That if I walk away now, it won't just be me who loses. It'll be everyone who finally believed change was possible." After she hung up, she slipped the letter from Amar, the young girl whose mother had cried during her CNN interview, into her jacket pocket. She wanted it close when the moment came. At headquarters, the lobby pulsed with tension. Angela Cruz was already there, coordinating staff who were handing out press packets. She rushed over when Camille arrived. "We've confirmed Castellano has secured about 40% of the smaller shareholders, but Hartwell's coalition is holding steady. It's going to come down to swing investors. Gerald Marks, looking paler than usual, joined them. We've got maybe 48 hours before rumors of this split leak to the financial press. If we don't hold the line, Castellano will frame this as a rescue mission." Camille nodded, her jaw tightening. "Then we don't give him the chance." Upstairs, the boardroom was packed with tension. Rows of suited investors filled the glossy chamber, their murmurs echoing like the low rumble of thunder. At the head of the long oak table, board chair, Elizabeth Morgan prepared to open the proceedings. Castellano sat across from Camille, immaculate in his tailored suit, his smirk barely restrained. He tapped a gold pen against his notepad, as if the outcome was already written. Elizabeth cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this emergency session. Today, we will vote on a motion brought forth by shareholders representing 22% of equity to replace the current CEO, Camille Harrington, with interim leadership appointed by investor Victor Castellanos Group. Miss Harrington has requested to address the board before the vote." All eyes turned toward her. Camille stood slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze. She glanced once at Angela and Gerald seated at the edge of the room, then at the sheet of paper in her pocket. "2 weeks ago," she began, her voice steady but quiet, "I was assaulted on one of our planes by someone who believed I didn't belong in the seat I had paid for. What followed was not just about me. It exposed a culture of discrimination woven deep into this company's fabric." She paused, scanning the room. Some investors shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward. Castellano tapped his pen again. "We had 2 choices," Camille continued. "We could cover it up, fire one person, and move on as if nothing had happened. Or we could face the truth that the problem was not one employee, but a system that allowed prejudice to hide under professionalism." She reached into her pocket and pulled out Amar's letter, unfolding it carefully. "This is from a young girl named Amara. Her mother was once told she didn't belong in first class because she didn't look wealthy enough." Amara wrote, "Please don't let them win. We need to know sometimes the good guys actually do." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Camille's voice grew stronger. "This vote isn't about whether I remain CEO. It's about whether we choose fear or dignity, whether we let short-term profit dictate who belongs in the sky, or whether we lead the industry into a future where every passenger is respected. Castellano promises returns. I promise responsibility. And responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, is the only return that endures." A hush fell over the room. Even Elizabeth seemed moved. Castellano, however, rose smoothly to respond. Poetic, he said with a thin smile. But shareholders are not poets. They're investors, and investors care about numbers. Since Ms. Harrington began her crusade, stock has dropped nearly 20%. That is not leadership, it is negligence. You may applaud ideals, but ideals do not pay dividends. I can restore value, cut unnecessary costs, and stabilize this airline. You can either have dignity or profit, but you cannot have both. The divide sharpened instantly. A few investors nodded in agreement. Others frowned at his bluntness. Camille felt the heat of anger rise in her chest, but forced herself to remain calm. Elizabeth signaled for the vote to begin. Ballots were distributed electronically. Camille sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, heart pounding. She caught Angela's eyes across the room, steady, encouraging. Gerald sat rigid, staring at the screen like a man awaiting a verdict. One by one, the votes were cast. The digital counter at the front of the room ticked upward. Green for Camille, red for Castellano. The numbers ran neck and neck, each beep tightening the knot in Camille's stomach. 49 to 48, then 50 to 49, then tied at 52. Finally, the counter froze. Elizabeth took a breath, then announced, by a margin of 54 to 53, the motion to remove Camille Harrington as CEO has failed. Ms. Harrington remains in position. The room erupted in murmurs. Relief washed over Camille so forceful she nearly swayed in her chair. Angela covered her mouth in shock, tears springing to her eyes. Gerald exhaled loudly, slumping back with visible relief. Castellano's jaw tightened, his smirk finally gone. He rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "This is not over," he muttered darkly, gathering his papers. "You may have won today, Miss E. Harrington, but investors are fickle. They'll tire of your morality soon enough." Camille stood too, facing him squarely. Maybe, but today they chose integrity. And that's a tide. You can't stop with threats or money. He gave her one last cold glance before striding out, his entourage trailing behind him. The board slowly dispersed, some congratulating Camille quietly, others avoiding eye contact. Elizabeth Morgan approached, her expression complex. "You survived this battle, Camille. But know that Castellano is right about one thing: investors can be fickle. You'll need to prove your reforms are sustainable." "I will," Camille promised, her voice steady. Later, in the quiet of her office, the team gathered. Angela hugged her fiercely. "You did it. You actually did it." Camille shook her head softly. "No, we did it. Every voice, every passenger, every complaint we refused to ignore. This wasn't my win. It was ours." Gerald raised a glass of water and a mock toast. "To dignity," he said. Camille smiled faintly. "To dignity and to the work ahead. Because this was just one vote. The real victory will be when no one ever questions who belongs in the sky again." The days following the vote felt different, lighter, though the air still carried the electricity of a storm that had passed but not vanished. Camille Harrington walked through the lobby of Harrington Aviation Headquarters, and for the first time in weeks, employees greeted her not with anxious glances, but with quiet pride. She could see it in their eyes, hope. Angela Cruz walked beside her, phone buzzing constantly. Media outlets keep calling this the narrowest win with the widest impact. Hashtags are trending. Passengers are sharing testimonies. And our customer trust scores have jumped 15 points in just 3 days. Camille smiled faintly. "Trust is fragile. Let's make sure we earn it every day." They stepped into the boardroom where Gerald Marks was already waiting with a thick folder. "I've prepared a roadmap," he said. If we want to make reforms stick, we need to institutionalize them policies, contracts, accountability measures. Castellano will be watching for cracks. Camille sat at the head of the table. Then we don't give him cracks. We give him walls he can't break. For the next hour, the three of them sketch plans expanding the Clear Skies Initiative into mandatory training across all levels, creating independent oversight committees, and establishing a whistleblower hotline managed by a third party. Angela proposed a passenger council to meet quarterly with executives. Gerald added financial safeguards to reassure investors that reforms weren't reckless spending, but strategic investment. By the end, the whiteboard was crowded with arrows and bullet points. Camille stepped back, studying it. "This isn't just reform," she said quietly. "It's rebuilding culture from the ground up." As they left the room, Angela tugged Camille's sleeve. "There's something you should see." She led her to the atrium, where a group of employees had gathered. In the center stood David Monroe, the veteran passenger with a cane. He held up a framed photograph of the elderly woman from the town hall who had spoken about living through segregation. Beneath the photo was a plaque engraved with her words, "Don't stop. Please, don't stop." Camille's throat tightened. The employees applauded softly, not with the roar of victory, but with the steady rhythm of solidarity. She bowed her head, whispering to herself, "We won't stop." Yet beyond the walls of her company, the world remained turbulent. Castellano had vanished from public view, but rumors circulated of his plotting elsewhere. Some said he was rallying new investors. Others whispered of lobbying campaigns in Washington aimed at clipping Harrington Aviation's influence. Senator Eleanor Briggs called one evening. "I want you to testify again," she told Camille. "This time not just about your company, but about the industry at large. The hearings are moving toward legislation, and your voice will be crucial." Camille hesitated. "You know he'll use that to say I'm more politician than CEO." "Let him," Briggs replied firmly. "You've already proven leadership isn't just about numbers. It's about people. That's what scares him most." 2 weeks later, Camille stood again under the bright lights of the Capitol. Cameras flashed. Senators leaned forward, and millions watched from their homes. She spoke not as the embattled executive fighting for her job, but as a woman who had lived the sting of dismissal, the humiliation of disbelief, the fire of resilience. "When I was dragged off my own company's plane," she said, voice clear, "the pain wasn't just physical. It was the reminder that to some, no matter how much you achieve, you will never belong. That is why reform matters. Not for me, for the girl writing letters from her kitchen table, for the grandmother who still feels the sting of segregation, for the young man told his seat must be a mistake. This industry can no longer afford dignity as an option. It must be our foundation." The room was silent when she finished. Then, slowly, senators began to applaud. The sound grew, echoing through the chamber, broadcast across the nation. Back in New York, Camille returned to her penthouse balcony, gazing out over the glittering skyline. Angela joined her, leaning against the railing. "Do you ever think," Angela asked, "that maybe all this, the hearings, the fight, Castellano is bigger than just airlines?" Camille nodded slowly. "It always was. Airlines are just the stage. The real story is about who gets to belong in the spaces we share." Angela smiled softly. "And you've made them listen." Camille exhaled, the tension of months finally easing. "We made them listen." That night, she dreamed of her father. He was standing in a sunlit hangar, wiping grease from his hands, smiling at her with that quiet pride he always carried. In the dream, He said only one sentence. "You kept the skies open." She woke with tears on her cheeks, but also with peace. Months later, Harrington Aviation unveiled its new program, "The Sky Belongs to Everyone." The campaign spread across airports, ads, and onboard announcements. Training manuals were rewritten, complaint systems overhauled, and passengers saw tangible change. Shareholders, once nervous, now celebrated the company's resurgence. Stock prices recovered, but more importantly, customer loyalty soared. Passengers chose Harrington Aviation not just for comfort, but for conscience. Victor Castellano remained in the shadows, plotting his next move. But for now, his empire had cracked, and Camille's had grown stronger. On the anniversary of the incident, Camille boarded one of her planes, not as CEO, but as a passenger. She took a seat by the window, closed her eyes, and listened to the pre-flight announcement. The flight attendant's voice rang out. "We at Harrington Aviation believe the sky belongs to all of us. Every face, every story, every seat." Camille smiled. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was flying free. Life teaches us that respect cannot be bought with titles, wealth, or status. It is earned and given in the way we treat one another. This story reminds us that discrimination does not disappear simply because someone is powerful or accomplished. In fact, moments of injustice often arrive when least expected, cutting deeply because they remind us of wounds carried for a lifetime. But it also shows something more: resilience. The woman who was humiliated could have chosen silence or even revenge. Instead, she chose transformation, turning personal pain into systemic change. That is a lesson for all of us. No matter our age, it is never too late to stand up, to demand dignity, and to insist on fairness, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us. We may not all be billionaires. We may not control companies or command boardrooms, but each of us has influence in our families, our communities, our workplaces. The way we respond to injustice, even in small moments, can ripple outward. The true measure of our lives is not just what we endure, but what we choose to change for others. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Your time and presence mean more than words can express. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep telling stories that inspire dignity, justice, and hope.